existentialism. You remembered. So I will just repeat the last question, the last sentence, sorry. As the background of the philosophical ideas that Frankl has drawn from, we have three axes. The one is existentialism, the other is phenomenology, and the third one is humanistic psychology. Now, as we do not have so much time today, I will focus my discussion only on existentialism. Perhaps later on at some point we will do a series, or we will go on with the other influences. But today I will focus on existentialism. So just for a framework for ourselves, I would like to start with a recapitulation of the main ideas of Frankl, so that we have what to relate to while I'm presenting the existential ideas. So I just remind all of us, and all of us who come from logotherapy know it by heart, of course. This is his dimensional ontology. For those people who are here and they do not recognize the word ontology, ontos psychology, it means the science of, or the theory of. So this is his view on man as a three-dimensional being, okay? And so we have here, I go from the outer ones to the inner ones. We have the body, which is soma in Greek, the mind, which is the psyche in Greek, or the psyche, to be correct, and the spirit, sometimes pronounced as nous in Old Greek, is our outermost and innermost identity. And this is very, very important. And at the heart of which lies conscience. For those Hebrew speakers who do not know the word, this is matspun, okay? So here I would like to throw to all of you a provocative question. And remember, it is provocative, and I only want you to wave if you think yes, or to say no, but we don't start discussions here. I want to ask, do you think we have a spirit? And I don't see you.
I dropped, that's why.
Okay. So did everybody hear my question? I asked, do you think we have a spirit? And this is, I remind you, a provocative question. Just wave if you think yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Somebody said no, Benjamin.
I see more yes, and perhaps other ones think to themselves, we cannot. Yeah, I see Ziva is putting the hand with the, I forgot what it's called. Yeah, okay. So I don't want to spend time on that. As I said, it's a provocative question. The answer is that whether you said yes or whether you said no, you're all wrong. And that was my aim of my question, because we do not have a spirit. We are spirit, according to Viktor Frankl and according to many, many other traditional spiritual schools. So it's a matter of being, it's not a matter of having. So we are spirit, and Frankl repeats again and again and again, man is spirit. So that is utterly important for all of us to remember that while we are continuing our discussion. As I said, this is just recapitulation of the main ideas of Frankl, so that we know how to relate to them later.
There's a request to repeat the Hebrew word for conscience.
Matspun. I invited some Israeli people, so that's good if you ask. Okay, Matspun. So that lies at the heart of the spiritual dimension, and because of the word naos, or sometimes pronounced nous, I will sometimes refer to it, and all logotherapists over the world know that we refer to it as the noetic dimension in ourselves. Now, the outer layers, which are the body and the mind, Frankl calls them just the wrappings of the true person, whereas the spiritual dimension, the noetic dimension, is really truly who we are, okay? The only problem is that normally we forget who we are, and we misidentify with our outer layers, the body and the mind. Who can relate to that? I can tell you that I can relate to that. Often when we are emotional or when we feel a threat or a danger, we are forgetting who we truly are, and we fall into forgetfulness, okay? So, of course, in this diagram that he brings, he, of course, negates determinism, he negates mechanism, atomism, and nihilism, which means that life has no meaning. So I go on, and here I wanted to illustrate very shortly what happens that when we do not take into account the spiritual dimension. This is an illustration that I took from a book called Flatland by Abbott that was written a long time ago, that has nothing to do with logotherapy, but I think that it gives a very, very, very good illustration of the idea of a reduction of man to 2 dimensions only. So we have on the right-hand side, we have a circle, whereas on the left is happening with the, okay. So a visitor comes from the outside with 3 dimensions, but the people understand him because they don't have the tools to understand another dimension. They just don't have it. So I'm asking, how is communication possible at all? Okay, so now I move to the next slide, which shows exactly the same idea by Frankl himself, and I'm sure that most of you who are logotherapists know this diagram. So Frankl shows us a cylinder that if you put a source of light on the right-hand side, what you would get on the other side is, how do you call it? I forget the word in English.
A cylinder?
Square. Rectangle.
A rectangle. No, the cylinder becomes a rectangle. That's the reduction. And when you put this source of light on top of the cylinder, what you get on the other side is a circle. Now I'm asking all of you, do the circle and the rectangle represent the cylinder? Well, the answer is that there are 2 aspects of it, but do they capture the wholeness of the cylinder? The answer is absolutely no, because they miss the dimension of inwardness, like I have explained before, okay? So now I want to start moving into our main subject of today about existentialism. And until the time that existentialism started, we are talking about the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and that is more or less the time of Frankl. Until then, there was the concept of truth with a big T crowning philosophy, okay? And then it was a rationalistic way of thinking, speculating by the mind. And if you remember the parable of the chess game of Frankl, that he says if someone asks what's the best move in chess, that means to ask what is the meaning of life, he answers, it cannot be answered in an abstract way. It has to be always considered according to the uniqueness of the situation, the person I'm playing with, and the situation on the board, okay, of the game. So until then, it was very rationalistic, very much speculation of the mind, until comes, and that is the beginning of existentialism, comes a young philosopher by the name of Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher. And he comes after Hegel, who was very rationalistic, and he rebels against this trend of rationalism. And he's only 22 and he goes on a vacation and he's very troubled. As a deeply religious person, he's asking himself, what is really the purpose of my life? What does God want of me? Something that I will have something to live and die for, and not just an abstract truth that will stand naked and cold before me and I don't have any relation to it. So he sits against the sea on a vacation, and then he writes in his diary, I feel that all these abstract philosophies are like an architect who has built a beautiful building but has not found, he bought cutlery and furniture, but he has not found a woman to share his life with, the life's joys and life's suffering. And so that means he has no meaning in his life. And all those architects of philosophy have built beautiful buildings, but he says when you ask where is the architect living actually, then you find the person living in the dog's hut. That means there is a cleavage, there is a cut between the philosopher who is philosophizing and as a person and how he's living, and the his philosophy. And that Kierkegaard wants to break, okay? And these things that I've told you now that he writes in his diary have become the manifesto of existentialism, okay? Now, I have drawn a special table for you in which I have included the main existentialist philosophers, and there are even more than that, but I couldn't include all of them. And I will tell you in a moment what was my criterion to choose them. But I must say that it is even much more vast, because existentialism also goes into cinema and into literature. But I chose only those philosophers that somehow Frankl is influenced by them and is, as I said, dialoguing with them, and a lot of the times without saying their names, okay? So we will delve very deeply now into this table that I've drawn especially for this lecture. So during the whole existential philosophy, there is a distinction that is going between two modes of being in the world. The one is the inauthentic way, and the other is the authentic way. And all those philosophers are calling us for a journey of the development of the self, from what you could call a survival humanity and what you could call true humanity. And that actually reminds us very much of what Frankl talks about in subhuman level and human level. So here, the first one that I mentioned, we come back to Kierkegaard, that we have already heard a lot about him. And he calls this inauthentic way of being, he calls it estrangement and alienation. Well, in the first place, he actually means that we are alienated from ourselves. Like I told you about Viktor Frankl, that he says we don't have awareness of our spiritual dimension. We forget it. And then we fall into forgetfulness and we misidentify with the wrong spheres of our being. I don't even call it dimensions of being, because only the real spiritual, the noetic dimension, is a dimension. So Kierkegaard talks about this alienation, especially from myself, and then, of course, from other people and from God. As I told you, he was a very religious thinker, and I will come to it, or I will even mention it right now, that there is a great distinction between religious existentialists and secular existentialists. And many thinkers, including in logotherapy, are not aware enough of this distinction. And sometimes they put together, for example, Albert Camus with the myth of Sisyphus, if you know about it, people who have claimed that life has no meaning, which is very contrary, of course, to Frankl's view, who, like you all know, says that life has meaning in all circumstances, even the worst circumstances. And we know the story of the concentration camps, that even there he could see a sunset or sunrise, and even there he said, if our coming out of this suffering would not have meaning, then it doesn't even have meaning. I mean, if our suffering, has no meaning here, even our release from this situation would have no meaning, which is a very far-fetched claim. Okay, so I come back to Kierkegaard. What he says is that there are three stadia, three circles of life. The first one he calls the aesthetic one, that you just jump from one stimulus to the other and you just enjoy yourself. He takes Don Juan to be the symbol of that you jump from one stimulus to the other, but the satisfaction is very short. Then you must have another stimulus. And then in the process of the development of the self, there comes the second stadium, which is the moral laws. Then you discover that you can listen to what society tells you to be the moral laws, okay? And then he says that is even not enough, because he wants to really arrive to authentic life, what I said before, that he's asking himself, what does God want of me in terms of my own special task in life, okay? So the last stadium that he is describing is what has become very well known to be the leap of faith, and that he calls the religious state, the religious stadium. And in that, you really find out what God wants of you, and you begin to live an authentic life. Now, after him comes Nietzsche, and you will see in this table that each of those philosophers actually says it's the same atmosphere, it's the same ideas, but in different terminologies and different concepts, if you want. But you can feel the atmosphere that it's the same, okay? So Nietzsche talks about the herd mentality. And the herd mentality is like, in Hebrew, it is edel, mentality shel edel. So you repeat things that you have heard, you just do whatever everybody is doing, and you are kind of mechanically going through life. And in opposition to that, he puts in the authentic state of mind, he says, this is self-creation. He calls us to create our life as a work of art. That means that you become creative. In Frankl's view, you can compare it to the creative values, um, to the creative values where you are engaged in the world and you are being creative in your doing, in your contributing to the world. And he calls it, Nietzsche, from being human to human. He has a book called like that, being human to, with double O, human, to become what he calls in German Übermensch, which is Superman. That means that we are raising our consciousness to be on a different perspective on life, that we can really choose the way we live, and while self-creating our lives as an art work. But I must say here that, as I promised you, I will try to decipher the dialoguing that Frankl is having with all these ideas, explicitly or implicitly, because he doesn't say most of the time with whom he's dialoguing. As you know, Nietzsche said, God is dead. And by that, he said, we are supposed to create our own values because the traditions who told us what to do have fallen already. Now, Frankl agrees that traditions have fallen, and therefore, as I showed you in the beginning, he puts the accent on conscience as the organ of discovering meaning in life, hamatzpun, to discover the meaning of life and the call of life every moment. He mentions conscious, that because of the traditions which have fallen, we have to rely on our inner world, our conscience, to know what is right and what is wrong. But the way Nietzsche expresses it is that he says we can also create our own values. And with that, Frankl does not agree. What Frankl did take from Nietzsche is the yes to life, which is very strong, and it's very strong in Frankl as well. But he does not agree that we create our own values because, as you know, for Frankl, values are objective. Values are objective. I repeat that because that is very, very, very important. Now I move to Heidegger. You always see the name of the philosopher in the middle, okay? I move to Heidegger, who calls the inauthentic way mode of being, he calls the they, just, you know, kind of an anonymous person, the they, hahem in Hebrew. And in German, it is das Man. Those Dutch people from here can understand it very well. And it's again the idea that people are, or we are, many times, as I said, we all fall to forgetfulness. Even those who are walking the spiritual path for many, many years, we tend to forget who we truly are, okay? So we just do whatever everybody is doing. We repeat dead truths that we have read somewhere. We repeat dead truths that we have heard on the radio or somewhere. And we do not have the what you could call the spring water of truth itself that is revealed to you in this very moment. In this particular point, I would like to tell you that spiritual teachers, big spiritual teachers, you know, when they talk, they kind of listen inside and at the same time they talk outside. I have witnessed personally the great teacher of the 20th century, Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti. That was an incredible thing. when you hear such people and you ask them after a minute, what did you say last sentence? And they probably would never know what they said because it's always new, like spring water. It's always new. The next moment they will say some truth that is coming from inside of them, or if you could say from transcendent itself. I myself had, if I can just mention it for one moment here, I had a very life-changing experience while meeting personally Krishnamurti. And when he looked in my eyes, I felt that I was thrown into the noetic dimension. I was thrown into a higher dimension. And it took me maybe 30 years to decipher what has happened in that, what is called in German Augenblick, blink of an eye of intuition, that I understood the whole spiritual process of the development of the self. Now with Heidegger, he says that only in very rare moments in life, we would see the revelation of the light in the normal physical world. But normally we do not see it because, as I said, we fall into forgetfulness. But only in the situation that you are suddenly find yourself in a mode of being that he calls being unto death, or being towards death, the death of yourself or the death of a very close person to you, all the coordinates of your life, of your everyday awareness, they collapse. And then you immediately are thrown to what he calls dread. Dread is more than fear. In Hebrew, it is eima. You are falling into a situation that you are terribly afraid of this collapsing of all your coordinates, because you fall into the void. And then only are you going into it, and dialectically you're coming back to the real life, realizing that it wasn't about your own death. It's not a physical death. It's a kind of death of your illusionary identity that we talked about before, that we mistakenly identify ourselves with our outer layers, like the body and the mind. But this is not our true identity. And what happens then, that if you're ready to go into this void, you come back to real life, to the reality that we live in everyday life. You come back with a new realization of who you truly are, and then you look at life and at yourself completely differently. And Heidegger talks a lot about the concept of aletheia, which means revelation, which means unhiddenness. So if we have a kind of veil, vilon in Hebrew, if we kind of have a kind of veil on our perception, both of ourselves as well as of the world, this veil is suddenly removed. And by this removal of the veil, we see the truth of being who we truly are, and then we see reality completely different. And of course, our whole behavior changes, and our relationship to the world and to other people changes. And then he calls aletheia. Aletheia in Greek means, as I said, it means removal of forgetfulness, removal of the veil. And that is very beautiful. Now I move to Sartre, and I must say, I already told you that there is a great distinction between religious existentialists and secular ones. Sartre was a secular one, but nevertheless, because I tried not to include in this table the secular ones, in order to relate to Frankl as much as possible. But I must tell you, with Sartre, I decided to put him here because still there are many, many interconnections with Frankl's philosophy, especially about freedom and about his discussion of the I. But Sartre takes it very far. He says, he has a very well-known saying, man is doomed to freedom. Doomed means we have no choice. Man is doomed to freedom. האדם נידון לחופש. And here I would bring also a saying of Erich Fromm, who was a psychoanalyst, but he also belongs to existentialism that goes further. And he says, he has a book called Escape from Freedom. So we want freedom always. We do say we want freedom, but actually we run away from our freedom. And how do we run away from our freedom? We run away by self-deception. We kind of deceive ourselves that we're on the right path when we kind of narrow down our possibilities to be free and to be a full person with infinite possibilities. Heidegger talks about infinite possibilities when your consciousness opens to this void, and then you discover infinite possibilities, and when all those coordinates collapse, you are not confined to what you thought you are actually. So Sartre says we are afraid of this freedom, and then we go into self-deception. Now, as all these ideas are kind of heavy philosophers, heavy philosophy, heavy stuff. So I will tell you, like a comic relief in this presentation, I will tell you two very nice anecdotes that Sartre is sharing. So I will stop the share for a moment and tell you. I just don't know how to put myself on spotlight. Do you know Memdu, or do you see me well?
I see you well, so no need to.
Okay, no need. Okay, so I just want to tell you two little anecdotes which are quite funny that Sartre is bringing, and this will act as a comic relief in this philosophical presentation. He tells about a student who is meeting with a professor, and they're discussing great academic, very high academic matters. And all of a sudden, this professor starts flirting under the table with the legs of that student who is a woman. And this student, she doesn't take a stand. She just goes on pretending that they are talking about these highly philosophical ideas. And that Sartre then says she is not taking a stand. She is self-deception. She makes it as if she doesn't have a choice, that she's not free to be a complete human being by taking a stand and saying, sorry, we are here for academic relation. I am not accepting that. So that's one funny story that he tells. And another story that he tells is that a waiter comes and he's kind of very stiff in his way of serving the people, and all of a sudden something falls, etc. But instead of just being human and being free with all his possibilities to be completely himself, he goes on just playing the role of being a waiter. So these are two funny examples that give us the feeling of what does it mean to be accountable? What does it mean to be responsible for your freedom, as contrary to running away from your freedom? So I come back to the presentation. I must say that, you know, philosophers are known to be the last dinosaurs of technology, but I have become so much more technological that I'm actually satisfied with myself that I arrived to the same slide. So Frankl has, as I said, many interconnections in terms of freedom with Sartre, and that's why I included him here. But as Sartre is a very secular thinker, and he rejects, he claims that we really invent, even he uses the word invent our values. Sartre, I found that he is the only philosopher that Frankl mentions by name his rejection of his ideas in several books, in several times. He says, it is not true that we create our own values. And then he goes on to say, like Sartre is claiming, okay? So there I must tell you that he is very much against Sartre in this respect. Now I move to Marcel, who is I find him, he's much less known, but it's a French philosopher, but I find him an extremely interesting thinker, also a very religious one, that from everything that I have researched, he actually knew about Frankl, and he writes sometimes about Frankl, but as far as I have found, Frankl did not know him. And my guess is that he was not so immersed in the French tradition, okay? So Marcel has a very poetic and beautiful philosophy in which he makes this distinction between observation and testimony as two modes of being, okay? Observation means that you are not really participant. You are not really participating in your life. You are just observing it from the outside, as if you are not engaging really in life. This was the ideal of the science until the quantum physics started, that even there, the observer is considered to be influencing the object of research that he's observing. But in former science, it was the ideal that we do not engage at all with the object of observation. But here we are talking about life. So if you're not participating in your life, when you are not engaging in your life, you stay an outer observer, and then you cannot feel the depths of the meaning of your life, okay? And as opposed to it, he describes this state of being that he calls testimony. And testimony, I find it a very beautiful notion that he has chosen, because it's actually giving testimony to your life. It is actually showing your accountability, your responsibility for life. And he makes a distinction here between the thinking me and the believer or the prayer one in me. So as long as I'm just thinking about life, I will just be an observer. But when I identify more with the praying me and with the existential me, and there is no cleavage between the two, even though the gap will somehow always be there, but we have to work on it to make it closer and closer. And so he has a very beautiful analogy that he says, we have to relate to our life like a gift. And we have to relate to it as if we're having guests, and all the time be open to whatever comes to us in life, and give testimony to who we truly are. And listen to what he says. He says, this is something that this state of being is not something that can be proven, or it's not something that can be analyzed. It is something that has to be experienced. And by this, he actually goes on with the same tradition that Frankl is also going after, of the difference between having and being. So it's a matter of being and not a matter of having, like I have reiterated in the beginning, that we are spirit. That's why I asked that provocative question. And when we are our true self, then it's totally different from our thinking self. Actually, Frankl relates to this tradition very often. I'm sure the logotherapists here will remember that in many of his books, he relates to Pascal by name, by the way, who says, the heart has its reasons, which reason cannot understand. And I'm sure you can understand the play of words. The heart has its reasons, הסיבות, which reason, התבונה, cannot understand. And that he quotes many times, like he quotes Nietzsche. That's very, very beautiful. And that's a whole tradition that Frankl, I can say, belonged to it in terms of philosophies of life and not rationalistic philosophers. Like later on, Dilthey and Bergson and so on, that I don't have time to enter here, which is not existentialism. Now I move to Buber, which I am sure that a lot of you know this distinction between I-it and the I-thou. The I-it is kind of objectification and reification of the person. So you reduce the person to being an object, and you do not relate to the person as a true human being. You keep your masks, you keep distinction, you keep the distance, and you actually objectify the person. And in opposition to that, he brings the I and thou. And the I and thou, it's a real relationship where you can take off your masks. Of course, you can do it in a safe place. You can do it with a therapist. You can do it with a pastor. You can do it with a rabbi. You can do it with a very good friend, that you can feel that you can take your masks off and really connect to soul, also to speak spirit to spirit, a person to a person, and be truthful. And Buber was the one to say, life means to be called. So life is a call, and therefore he says, to answer the call of life is responsibility, which you know is the play of words on responsibility. And with that, Frankl is influenced by Buber. What is different in Frankl's view in terms of Buber, that in his books he hardly mentions the name Buber, but in an article I read, he owes a lot to Buber. He gives him a lot of credit. But nevertheless, if Buber talks about the I and thou, and by the way, he describes it in 3 axes: man to man, man to nature, and man to God. And in the end, by the way, he says that all axes of I and thou unite in the thou, the ultimate thou, which is God. And that is very beautiful. Marcel also relates to this ultimate thou, which I think, in my interpretation, it goes together with the ultimate meaning of Frankl. But still, nevertheless, Frankl, when he talks about Buber, he adds, he turns it from a dyadic relationship of I and thou, he turns it into a triangle when he says it is the I and thou and transcendence itself. Okay, so transcendence itself can be also called the logos. Those who are logotherapists here would perfectly understand it, because this is the principle of meaning in life. From there, he drew the name logotherapy and logo philosophy, of course. And he then, of course, says that because of our inherent relatedness to the divine, to the ultimate meaning, which is interchangeable by logos or transcendence. By the way, this I'm adding, this is the origin of our will to meaning, because we are related inherently to the divine or to the logos. And here I would like to mention very shortly the parable that you all know. You know that Frankl likes to use analogies very much, like the chess game I have mentioned. He says very beautifully that you cannot understand the phenomenon of the human navel without its relation to his mother. And just in the same way, you cannot understand the phenomenon in human existence of human conscience, matzkun, without its relation and history and origin in transcendence itself. So it belongs to a higher dimension than our everyday life awareness. And that's very beautiful. We can also interpret it that Buber's saying that the ultimate thou is God, we can compare it to Viktor Frankl's self-transcendence. I told in the last fall, that when we had a session about Buber, I said that I have read an article of Professor David Gutman, who brought, as you know, Professor Frankl to Israel, that he says that he sees it to be the same. But nevertheless, Frankl adds this parameter of being a triangle, remembering this transcendence also in the therapeutic relationship. Now I come to Karl Jaspers, who have influenced Frankl very much, and Frankl gives him credit for that. I have not included Max Scheler, for example. I'm sometimes asked why, because he was more a phenomenologist. And actually, many of these philosophers, because it's all in the same time, can be considered also phenomenologists. But here I wanted to concentrate on the existentialists. So Jaspers, he talks about other things as well, and theology and philosophical anthropology, but I wanted to stress here, in relation to what we are talking about, the state of what he calls automaton. And here we come back to the idea of forgetfulness, so that in our everyday life, we just forget who we truly are, and we do not have the access to our noetic dimension, our spiritual dimension. We just go on in an automatic, mechanistic way. But what happens in what he calls boundary situation in life, a little bit like Heidegger, who talked about being unto death or towards death, in any boundary situations in life, which in German would be Grenzsituationen, and for the Dutch people here, Grenzsituationen, then we wake up suddenly, and there happens the removal of forgetfulness. And this is very important, because we have that as a possibility in our development, in our journey of development of the self. And now at the end of this table, I specifically added the parallel distinction in Frankl's view of life and of man, and which I called existential vacuum in the inauthentic way of survival humanity, or the subhumanity, as he calls it, subhuman level, as opposed to meaningful life, that you self-transcend yourself, and the three ways of finding meaning that we all know about, then you come to the authentic way of living. And I would stress again what I said before, that the uniqueness of Frankl in this whole ideas that were in the air of authenticity and of coming out of our everyday consciousness is the will to meaning as a motivational source, motivational driving force in life. And that is, I repeat what I have said in terms of that analogy of the navel. I hope it is understood, because it's a little bit difficult to grasp if you hear it for the first time. I'm sure the logotherapists of you know it. So if transcendence is our origin, then obviously we would want to come back to it. We have a yearning to come back to our source of being, and therefore we begin our awakening process towards what we call ultimate meaning. And I must reiterate here that what Frankl calls the meaning of the moment is always a derivative of ultimate meaning. Some people don't make that observation, but for me, I am convinced that there cannot be a meaning of the moment unless there is, from to begin with, ultimate meaning. And then that causes you to remember every time, and if you use your conscience well, you are aware of the moment, of the meaning of the moment. Some people think that it's like in science, that you add another meaning of the moment and another meaning of the moment and another one until you come to something that will make you closer to ultimate meaning. But I think in spirituality, it doesn't go like that. It doesn't go like in empirical science. It's the opposite way. So I move further, and I want to...
Dida, you have nearly completed the hour, so...
Okay, I am coming closer to the end of the presentation. And we said before that we are a bit flexible here in terms of the times, so I am really coming closer. Okay, thank you, Memdu, for giving me this alert. Okay, so I wanted to make some the distinctions very clear here. What are the differences between the religious existentialists and the secular ones, while stressing that actually Frankl is the most optimistic one of the religious existentialists, and therefore he even talks about tragic optimism, as we all know. So I just wrote here the basic philosophical assumptions that are behind those views. The secular one has an assumption that we are all monads. Monads is a small entity, and we are not related to something bigger than ourselves or to one another. And they have a monadic concept of man. That means it's an assumption of separatedness, of meaninglessness. And I gave the example of the myth of Sisyphus of Camus before, and then Sartre as well, and Yalom, who comes afterwards, which I did not relate to him today. He's more like for the humanistic psychology. Whereas the religious stream has a concept of man, of being part of something greater than himself, in terms of relation to the world, relation to others, to nature, and to the transcendent, as I said before, to an inherent relation to the divine. And the basic assumptions here are two. One is of unity and wholeness and interconnections and meaningfulness, and the other is what we have touched upon very many times in this presentation, which is the assumption of forgetfulness, that we do forget who we truly are, and therefore we are called by all these philosophers and by Frankl for a transformative process of becoming aware of this relation to unity and wholeness, and of course to being and meaning. And you can guess yourself already that it is about Kierkegaard, Buber, Paul Tillich, that I have not mentioned in the table, but Frankl relates to him. Also another, or maybe I mentioned him shortly, another religious existentialist, and Marcel, Heidegger, and of course Frankl. And I'm coming right to the end in a very short time. I brought, to kind of sum up this presentation, I brought a quotation from a book called The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. And he says, if the doors of perception were clean, everything would seem to man as it is, which is really infinite, because it is that same veil that I have talked about in the beginning that clouds our perception of ourselves and therefore of reality, that doesn't let us see the infinite in every finite phenomenon. And I want to end with the same idea being presented by a very, very beautiful poem, also very known, by William Blake, that he says, to see it disturbs me. Yeah, to see a word in a grain of sand, and to see heaven in a flower, to hold infinity, to hold infinity in the palm of a hand and eternity in an hour. So you understand that actually it is to see the wholeness in the part, in every situation in life. So I will close this presentation now by wishing us all to have something to live for. And I will stop the share and open it for discussion. And maybe Memdu can read questions from the chat, or now I can.
Or if people can raise hands, so they can verbally ask their questions.
You mean you want to open the microphones?
Yes, they can unmute themselves. And
now I open the chat, so I see many. Yeah, Andreas. Hi, Andreas. That you said rectangle when I couldn't remember it. Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, so I see a lot of comments here, but I still don't see a question.
Questions or comments, verbal questions or comments.
You mean in the microphone?
Yes.
Thank you very much for all the people who are commenting and love the presentation.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Excellent presentation.
So I have a comment and question.
And who is talking?
Yeah.
This is Andreas.
Andreas, the philosopher. Yes.
Yes. The comment is life having the infinite possibilities is wondrous. And I try to embrace that. And then the question is, has anybody here truly perceiving and living life as having the infinite possibilities?
Well, I think it's an excellent question because we are all on the way. I said before that even though many of us have been on the spiritual path for many, many years, we are still struggling with falling into forgetfulness. So you are presenting this question, I guess, for all the participants, not just to me, whether any of us are experiencing this openness of consciousness, this mode of being, being open to infinite possibilities. That's a great question. So I would love to hear some answers from participants.
Dida, I can
Yes.
only speak for myself.
This
to
is
say
Carol
that-
speaking,
yeah,
right?
That is, yes.
Great.
That state of being doesn't happen all the time.
Yeah.
Something that comes to you in flashes every now and then. And if you can hold on to those flashes and make something of them, that then would be the value of that experience. But I think it's very difficult. It's like saying you want to be in a meditative state constantly, and it's not possible. It comes
Yeah.
and
I couldn't agree with you more, Carol, because when we have these flashes of suddenly realizing that there is something else beyond our daily consciousness, there is a saying that consciousness makes you remember, like you cannot go backwards. You are committed now to the realization that you discovered suddenly, and of course you will fall again and you will struggle again, but at the same time your consciousness has discovered something, so that you will strive to come back to that consciousness, to this realization. And it cannot be constant, but it reminds you always that there is a reference point that you have seen already.
Dida, is that similar to what you were saying earlier about the death of an illusionary image?
Yeah.
So that consciousness creates a death of an illusionary, as you said, image of yourself and takes you into another space.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's almost like a cycle.
Yeah, absolutely, because our ego, what we call in our everyday language, our ego is our illusionary identity, but we all misidentify with this identity, and we act in the world like that, okay? And when we suddenly have a kind of opening for even several seconds, we discover that it has been illusionary, but we of course fall back into it. But yes, that is the fall of the illusionary identity. There is a philosopher called Fichte, which I will not go into now. He calls it the small I and the big I. So the small I is this ego, and the big I is our authentic self. That all these philosophers somehow relate to this bigger self. Nietzsche, for example, says, although he's in controversy between the interpreters, whether he is secular or religious, but nevertheless, in the end of the process, he talks about being one with the wholeness of life. And that's the whole thing, that we're all invited to this journey of developing from our everyday consciousness to a higher level of awareness. Yeah, Tom?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Kimor, is there an argument to be made for using the term, I just lost it, instead of ruach for spirit, lev or levav?
Is there an argument, are you asking? Well,
Yes.
Sometimes the spirit is called neshama, the soul, and sometimes it's called, and in Judaism, by the way, maybe some of you will know there are 5 layers of the neshama, but I did not want to go into it because we would never come out of it. And yeah, and my question was very precise in terms of to ask, do we believe that we have something of that sort which is totally immaterial? And do we believe we have something like that? And in Frankl's language, it is the spiritual, the noetic dimension. But as I said, I tricked you into a wrong phrasing of the question. Do we have it in order to stress the point of what Frankl is saying? Man is spirit. It's a matter of being. This is our innermost being, definition of being.
So just a quick follow-up, and I'll mute myself again, and that is, what about in terms of conscience or matzpon? Would you think that lev, maybe not in modern Hebrew, but perhaps in rabbinic Hebrew or biblical Hebrew, I'm thinking particularly avodah balev or something along that line?
Avodat halev. Avodat
Yes.
halev. Yeah, of course. Avodat halev is the work of the heart. And we have it in what is called in Hebrew Pirkei Avot. For those of you who understand Hebrew, I know the Dutch people understand some Hebrew, at least Pieter and maybe William Mas, Dr. William Mas. I think Avodat halev is, of course, that we have to come back to our center, and our center is our heart. And that is why I talked about the wisdom of the heart in the beginning, or when I mentioned Pascal. And as I said, Frankl quotes Pascal many, many times, that the heart has its reasons which reason doesn't understand. And for those of you who understand French, in his original language, he says, le cœur a ses raisons que la raison ne comprend pas. It's exactly the same play of words. So and I will say something else here. Our analytical vehicle, that we mistakenly think that this is the vehicle, the tool to understand reality and ourselves, is just acting by dichotomy, either yes or no, right? But Frankl mentions that in order to manifest the work of conscience, amatzpun, you have to raise your awareness to a higher level, which unites the opposites, okay? It is, I believe the first one in the history of philosophy was Nicholas Colzanus, who talked about the uniting of the opposites, because there you have, it's like the yin and yang. They are completing each other. They are not contradictory anymore, because it's not by the mind. It's not a speculation of the mind. It is intuitive, and it is immediate and unmediated, actually, and you grasp it immediately. That's the nation. That's the working of the intuition. I have to say that my dissertation in philosophy has been on the spiritual intuition, and this is very much akin to Frankl's notion of conscience. And by the way, it all started by what I shared with you with the meeting of Krishnamurti, that it took several seconds. When he looked into my eyes, I really felt that it was a transmission of light into me, which worked in me for years, in terms of that it wanted to bring out of me a kind of, it was like a birth of meaning, something like that, which, by the way, it took 30 years, but by the way, it has become my doctorate dissertation in the end, because intuition takes a blink of an eye, But in order to decipher what is inside, what is implicated in that moment, in this blink of an eye, you need very, very deep understanding of what is happening there and what it contains, actually. So this is avodat halev. This is the work of the heart, and this is our task, actually, in our development, in our spiritual development. Our task is to always come back to our center, to always come back and ask our conscience, or if you want to ask our heart, what is the right thing to do at this very moment? And what is the right thing to respond to life in terms of responsibility? And as I said before, every moment is unique, and every meaning of the moment is unique, but nevertheless, it always derives from ultimate meaning, because otherwise there would be no transmission of a new direction that is revealed to you at that moment of real listening. And by the way, Frankl says that the true aim of education nowadays is not mediation of knowledge, but refining our conscience.
יופי, תודה רבה.
בבקשה. So if anybody else wants to
Questions,
yeah,
or comment.
yeah.
Noda is raising hand.
Yes.
Okay.
I saw you
yeah.
before. Let me find you again.
Okay. One question. In the beginning, you mentioned the distinction between having and a being.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the distinct characteristics of Frankl is he approached to the question of being through the meanings.
Yeah.
So the issue become hermeneutics, just Heidegger did.
Exactly.
So my question is, what exactly is the intersection? If you take an existential approach, what is the intersection of, in your perspective, between the existential approach and the hermeneutics?
And the what? And the what?
Hermeneutics.
Hermeneutics.
Yeah, hermeneutics. Because
Hermeneutics.
the issue is how you interpret, understand the meaning of being is critical in both for Heidegger and also Frankl. So how existential decisions or approach can shed light on hermeneutics. That's my. I'm interested in your comment on this.
Yeah. Well, hermeneutics comes more with Gadamer, for example, who is also related to Heidegger, but comes a bit after. And I have a feeling that Frankl does not relate too much to hermeneutics. And I can tell you that with Frankl, he goes very far in saying that at every single moment, there is only one right answer. So if you listen to your conscience, there's only one right answer, and conscience can also err, but then life will correct you. So I think that if you think of hermeneutics, you come more to the sphere of interpretations, right? And then you have different angles, right? And I think that Frankl, as far as I know, doesn't relate so much to hermeneutics. Perhaps I have to investigate more into it, but that also was not the subject of today. But I think it takes us further to something that Frankl is very firm about, that every moment has its own answer, the right answer. And sometimes you will know it retroactively and not at that moment. So that is my personal answer to you, but I'm very much willing to go on corresponding or talking about it later, and also investigating into this question more. But my intuition is that it takes us more into the vast interpretation of every statement or situation that can be interpreted in many, many, many ways. And some people say all these ways together will create the wholeness of the truth of that thing. And with that, I'm not sure that I agree, and I think Frankl will also not agree, because when he talks about the conscience being intuitive, he means that it sees right away the truth. It sees right away the right act for that moment, the right response to life when you are being called in life for any challenge that might be. And it's always for your higher being. It's always for your development, even in a very difficult situation in life.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think you answered that. Existential dimension, hermeneutics is whose Frankl added the decision at the moment by individual, whereas Gottman and others talks more general, hermeneutic theory, but the Frankl added decision by individual at that moment.
Yeah.
And so that is, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, that is because, as we said, what Frankl reiterates and emphasizes so much is the uniqueness of a person and uniqueness of a situation. So that makes it very precise that and again, we come to the chess game analogy, that you cannot just ask what is the truth about it or what is the meaning of life. You have to be concrete and not abstract, and not go into the mind interpretations. And I agree with you that it's always individual. It's always individual.
Yeah, and Frankl, in defining the religion, Frankl made a reference to Wittgenstein, and saying that the future of religion would have a more individual dimension, as opposed to general, organized, religion. So certainly I see, that kind of aspect. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. If you relate to Wittgenstein, that's all a complete different story, because
Yeah.
he was not an existentialist. So we want to confine our discussion to existentialism and to the uniqueness of Frankl, because, as I said in the beginning, my aim was through these influences to deepen our understanding of Frankl's thought. Frankl, I wouldn't say thought, but view on life and on men, and not to do a comparative study with other philosophers, of different streams. Because with Wittgenstein, I will say in one sentence, you can find writings of his that are very intuitive and they can correspond to what Frankl is saying, and other ones which are very logical. And I guess these are the movement from different states of awareness that we all experience. And with the philosophers, it's more dangerous, because we read it as something to be true. But we forget that in the traditional way, in Old Greek, when it started with the pre-Socratic and then with Socrates, that Frankl takes the Socratic dialogue to be a method, it was the wisdom, the love of wisdom. And the love of wisdom means the wisdom, the noetic wisdom, the spiritual wisdom, which is engraved in us. And we have to be very careful with modern philosophy that is having a lot of speculative thoughts about what could be true. And then we run into the risk of believing them because they are philosophers and important ones. But modern philosophy is not like classical philosophy when it started with the love of wisdom.
Okay, let's get 3 more questions or comments. I think Benjamin is waiting for a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll try to. Hi, Dr. Kimor. I want to say thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. And I'll try to keep my question short and to the point. So I want to mention a quote that scared me into action from Frankl. And now when I'm working with lots of young people who are looking for meaning, and I mentioned the same quote, a lot of different ideas come up that doesn't seem to fit. So this is a question and hopefully translates to some advice for them as well. So the quote from Viktor Frankl that spurred me into action was, "Man constantly makes his choice concerning the mass of present potentialities. Which of these will be condemned to non-being and which will be actualized? Which choice will be made an actuality once and forever, an immortal footprint in the sands of time? At any moment, man must decide for better or for worse what will be the monument of his existence."
Yeah, he says that again and again.
Yes.
Yes.
So this quote scared me into action, and it made me think of my responsibleness to others. When I mention it to the young people of today, who are struggling for meaning in their life, their focus becomes more inward, and it seems to go deeper into just themselves and not a responsibility outward. For example, one person said that they enjoyed playing video games and they play for hours and hours. And when I mentioned a responsibleness to the outside world, they said, "What about streaming? I can play video games and stream for people to watch." And it was difficult to, because I don't know much about streaming video games. It was difficult to respond to him appropriately about how that's actually helping people outside and the responsibleness to others aside from themselves. I hope the question makes sense.
I will try to answer you maybe by not using the language that you were using, but what came up in me is that there is a distinction in Frankl of looking inside and being innerly concerned with your neurotic inner world, right? He says it many times. He said it in an interview being in Israel with the Israeli television, because he's propagating all the time self-transcendence. And by self-transcendence, you are actually open to something higher than yourself as a task or a loved one, yes? So you are relating to something outside of yourself. But I think it doesn't contradict looking into yourself, because in order to look into yourself, that means connecting with your depth dimension that I started with, becoming more and more aware and developing your accessibility to your spiritual noetic dimension. Otherwise, you are deceiving yourself. And so about this video games, etc., I wouldn't even know what to answer, because I guess it is a sort of, I dare say, a kind of self-escape from the freedom that we really do have. But this freedom goes also always with responsibility in terms of Frankl. Yeah. So indeed, in our modern age, young people suffer from existential vacuum, and they suffer from addictions and from suicide and from all kinds of things, which I think Frankl's writing have succeeded to save many people from committing suicide. You know, in that a well-known example of St. Quinn prison, and in the camps themselves as well. And there is this very well-known little video that he's talking about the amount of people the youngsters in America who do not have any meaning in their lives. And by not having meaning, that means that they have not reached the accessibility to their inwardness, dimension of inwardness, which is the spiritual dimension. I hope that answers you.
It does. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
Two more questions, please,
Okay.
or comments.
Comments or questions or whatever.
So, Dida, it seems the conclusion. Let me hand over the microphone for concluding this beautiful speech.
Okay. Perhaps I would like to finish my presentation with a beautiful story, which is a Buddhist story that some of you might know. That a Buddhist monk, is seen to be carrying a loaf of bread on his one hand and a flower on the other hand. And he's been asked, why are you walking around with a loaf of bread on one hand and a flower on the other hand? And he says, the loaf of bread is that I have something to live from, and the flower is something to live for. So yeah, that is why I ended my presentation by wishing us all to have something to live for, which is much beyond ourselves. This is self-transcendence. This is having a purpose in our lives, like Kierkegaard was looking for. And I really hope that all of us can continue the legacy of Viktor Frankl, who is watching us from heaven, and continue to distribute this incredible view on life, as well as on the concept of man, towards as many people as we can, and especially being responsible to our own lives and being examples to other people, and therefore we can help other people. So thank you very much for your listening. Sometimes sometimes it happened that some of us stayed and we had a wonderful after party because we couldn't leave. So if anybody wants to stay and have a more intimate conversation, you are welcome. I have time, but depends on you. So I really thank you all
Yeah.
for your listening. And
Let me repeat that although I started recording a bit late and there are some technical problems, the recordings will be displayed on the Viktor Frankl Institute's webpage, and it will be there for a short period of time.
Yeah.
I'm reckoning it to upload it tomorrow or the day after. So if you really want to, there's too heavy knowledge there. If you want to watch, I will definitely inform you when I will upload the video.
Yes.
Thank you
yeah.
for.
Thank you, Memdu.
This is the most crowded session, Dida. This is the
Really?
10th logo chat, and we rise to 50, 56 or 57 people.
Well, it's my honor, I must say. And I want to say that if anybody has a question that one wants to continue discussing with me on the presentation, there is my email, but this is the university email and they are threatening all the time to close it. So I have another Gmail account now. So maybe Memdu can put also the Gmail account, but you're very welcome to continue the discussion with me. And it was a pleasure to meet you all, the known faces and the unknown faces. That's a great honor and pleasure for me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very
Dr.
much.
Kimor. Thank you.
Thanks, Dida.
Dankjewel, Dida.
That was Pan. So happy to see you. So
I
happy.
love you, Dida.
So happy to see you. And I haven't mentioned all people, but William Mas, Dr. William Mas, I'm very happy to see you. And
I'm very happy to see William Mas and Peter as well.
And Peter. Yeah, Pieter.
Pieter, I guess.
Pieter. Yeah, we correspond a little bit in Dutch. I have had the privilege to study for some years with the great Professor Henry van Praag in Dutch in Holland. So I unwillingly, but I learned some Dutch. So Pieter and me, he writes some Hebrew to me, I write some Dutch to him, and therefore I even tried with Dr. William Mas to enter one of your classes, but in the hope that I will understand, but I did not succeed technologically.
That's okay.
Cheers, Dida. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
תודה רבה, דידה.
בבקשה, I am happy to see you as an Israeli friend, and also Estelle, who stayed until the end as an Israeli friend, and all other friends, and both students and trainers from South Africa as well, and from all different countries. So we're all one family.
להתראות.
Later.
תודה רבה.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye. We'll all be in touch.